Welcome to the workshop. This is the first in what will be 3 workshops we'll be running on MyAccessID. We're running this as part of the NFCS NetworkPlus project, exploring the governance requirements for enabling UK DRIs to adopt MyAccessID. In the chat, I've put the link to the workshop website, which is also the website for our project. Other people on the team will keep reposting that, I think, as when people join, they can't see the history of the chat. Now, what we're going to be doing this morning is basically having sort of 2 one-hour sessions with a coffee break at 5 to the hour. We're having 3 talks in the first half from Cambridge, UCL and Hartree, then a talk in the sort of the second half with Bristol and from Jisc, and then we're going to try and make sure we save enough time at the end for a general Q&A session. We really want this to be kind of a discussive, sort of talkative workshop. We're really kind of sharing information and also trying to build a community. Now, this project is funded by the NFCS NetworkPlus project. The aim of NetworkPlus is it's funded a large number of projects across the UK, really to foster a sense of community around federation and to try and bring the UK DRIs together so that then we can build a national federated compute service to make it easier for researchers to make use of all of the services that we're offering. In particular, this project is exploring the governance requirements for enabling UK DRIs to adopt MyAccessID. Bit of a mouthful, but ultimately it's about trying to bring people together who are interested in federated identity and access management, and particularly authentication and federated authentication of people's logins. Now, what we want to do is we want to use this project to create a community of practice around the rollout of federated identity and access management across UK DRIs. We know it's lots of new technologies which are being used, and we want to try and share our experiences and really help everybody learn how to use them. And also as a community, explore lots of different technologies which are out there, which will enable us to achieve this goal of having federated identity and access management. The goal of the project is to create this community of practice and create a space where we can all talk to each other. Also to collect and publish case studies of groups who are trying to use federated IAM. Put together technical documentation that we can share, compliance documentation, because it's actually sometimes harder to do the compliance side than just the technical side nowadays. And generally help all of the DRI sites in the UK to explore and adopt federated identity and access management solutions. Now, our focus within our project is really MyAccessID and Keycloak, which we've identified as being sort of 2 key enabling technologies. We're not wedded to this. We really think a community of DRIs talking about IAM is more important than specific technologies, and things will always evolve. But you have to start somewhere, and for us, we feel that Keycloak and MyAccessID solve a lot of problems and are a good starting point really to get going. And we're going to be sharing a lot of information about how we use MyAccessID and Keycloak. We're sharing the information via a GitHub repo. We have a mailing list, IAM for DRI at jisc.ac.uk, to encourage people to sign up to. We have a website, and we're having workshops. There'll be 2 online workshops, one now, one in the early spring, and then there'll be an in-person workshop, which we'll be hosting sometime close to when the main NetworkPlus workshop will be taking place in early July. So I suspect it'll be sort of end of June-ish or early July, not trying to clash with ISC or anything like that. Our aim is to try and build a supportive community that shares experiences and explores and develops best practice. To that end, we thought, how do we all talk to each other? Would it be yet another Slack channel, Slack group? We realized there are too many Slack channels and Slack groups. So what we've done with this mailing list is this is a discussion mailing list. So basically anybody can post, anybody can receive it. So it's really a place where you can ask questions and sort of have discussions about how I am. But if you join it, please bear in mind that everybody can post, and so be courteous and nice to each other when we do that. Equally, our project is very open. If you feel like you really want to get involved, we're happy to have you join our project meetings and all of the other events that we'll be setting up. And, we'll have our websites and we'll have all the information we push through. But without further ado, I think we should really start with the talks because we have a packed program. So I'm going to start off by handing over to Deepak from Cambridge to talk about MyAccessID in practice from concept to integration in Cambridge's AIRR platform. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Christopher. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Deepak Agarwal. I'm part of the research computing services at University of Cambridge. And today's talk is a journey that we started when we started the AIRR platform implementation at the Cambridge site for the Dawn supercomputer access. And in this talk, we'll be seeing how we started our journey with MyAccessID, why MyAccessID was needed as a solution for federation, and how we have integrated it in our existing tools that we have been using for all other services. So just a brief overview of what AIR is. So AIR is a AI research resource. It's a national effort to support large-scale AI research using HPC and AI infrastructure. So we have two sites. One is Isambard AI at University of Bristol. Other one is Dawn at University of Cambridge. These are the two core AIR systems as of now. The government has a plan to increase the capacity by 20 times by 2030. So we may have more sites in future. But the goal for this presentation, from the context of this presentation is for these AI users, which can be, coming from very diverse communities, from different institutions, from universities, from small businesses. The idea with which we started is a researcher should be able to access both these systems using their existing institutional credentials without the need to create or manage separate account for each site. So this is the goal with which we started, and along the way, we implemented it, and I think the solution that Bristol has implemented is a bit different. We'll see in the talks later. I'm going to talk about how we have implemented it in our platform that we have built for AI users at Cambridge. Okay, so this slide is interesting because we hear a lot about federation. And when I started this project, I didn't know what federation is in the context of identity and access management. And I attended a workshop in Reading, which was my first introduction to federation. So what federation means? So it basically means I trust you to tell me who you are as a user, and therefore I can, you know, give you access to my system to be able to use the resources that I'm providing as a service provider. So any university A as an identity provider can access the services from university B, which is a service provider, but there needs to be some kind of framework which builds on trust. It has some components to it, which are legal, strategic, and operational agreement. And this is where most of the details go in, how you become part of the how you become part of the federation. But the question one should be asking is, do we need to have federation in our services? So this numerical formula gives a bit of understanding of why a site like Cambridge needs federation. This may not be the correct solution for every service provider, but for a site like Cambridge, which has scale, because we are serving a lot of users who are non-Cambridge users. So in terms of the scale, we see the value in federation in our services, and that's the reason we went ahead with the federation. So in terms of the federation identity, it's like it enables the user to make their home identity as portable, so they can take their home identity from their institute and can use those identities for the authentication on the service provider's platform. So MyAccessID helps in that. MyAccessID is a federated identity platform provided by Jant, and it supports secure login from any university that's part of Edugain. So MyAccessID acts like a middle layer between the universities and the service providers, and it connects the universities identity provider through Edugain and delivers standard identity attributes to the search services using the OIDC protocol. Yeah, going forward. The case for federation in research computing. So historically, user onboarding at Cambridge was manual. We have like three different categories of users: internal users, which are coming from University of Cambridge, tier 3; national consortium users, who we were onboarding through the same safe portal; and then we also had industrial users uh, who were, who were getting access through their email addresses and sharing their SSH keys. So the idea was, how do we streamline all these three categories of users and make the process as similar as possible for all of them. And this is when the idea of building a bridge between our services and all these three categories of user came. And MyAccessID kind of fits into this idea. We'll see in the next slides how we have implemented this. But the idea is we needed a hybrid approach, something that honors the our existing processes that we were using, and something which actually helps us in managing these users that we were about to get from the AIRR service. So, but we started with very simple goal, reusing our trusted processes, and while integrating the federation tools into our services. So out of that came out the Dawn Access portal. We call this, the name of the portal is Access, so you can call it as a Dawn Access portal or Cambridge Access portal. This basically enables the user and presents them a single pane of glass. So each category of the user can come to this portal, and they'll see two options of login. One is MyAccessID, other one is the identity of last resort, because some of the users who are not part of MyAccessID Federation institutes, they can't use MyAccessID. I think in later slides we are going to cover that. But the idea is, most of the users who are part of Edugain institutes, they should be able to use MyAccessID, and we should be able to present our services through a platform which gives them access through MyAccessID. So this platform that we have built, there are a bit more details in the next slide, but in the context of today's presentation, the idea is this federation bridge between the users and our portal where we present our services uses a tool, it's called MyAccessID, and it enables them to use our services without having to create their local identities. So in terms of the Dawn portal components that we have integrated, federated identity is the critical component, and this uses MyAccessID in it. What we have done, we have integrated MyAccessID with Keycloak. We have done it in a way which helps us in isolating the users who are directly coming from MyAccessID, and once they they accept our terms and condition only when we allow them to use our services, which is bit of an isolation. I'm going to discuss about the two Keycloak realms that we have created for Waldo users and other for LDAP users. So LDAP here is our source of truth for all the users that we onboard on our system. And because we have some users who can't use MyAccessID, so there is a way for them to get to the system by creating these local identities through Keycloak, which we are calling them as identity of last resort. In in terms of the portal, Waldo is a platform that we have been using for this portal. It's nothing but a project management portal where you can, as a user, as an administrator, you can manage the projects and you can invite members within the projects. You can, as a service provider, you can present your services through this portal. So it's very good platform, very well being used. In terms of how the users are getting the access, so the users can get access traditionally through SSH based access. The one that we are targeting is as well for the access is through Open on Demand. So we have integrated MyAccessID into our Open on Demand portal. So users who become part of a project within this platform, they can log in using MyAccessID to Open on Demand and submit the job from there. So in terms of the Keycloak integration, there are dual use cases that we have considered. So that we have considered two modes of MyAccessID integration. One is, so we have created two realm. One realm is called AIRR, other realm is called CSD3. CSD3 is a realm which we have been using for all our users, all our existing users. So what we have done for AIRR, we have created a separate realm, and this realm is basically allows anyone who has been invited within a project through Waldo, and they can come to this platform and they can use MyAccessID to accept their invitations. But in this realm, once they accept the invitation, only then they'll be able to access the CSD3 realm. So basically, we as a part of the workflow, what we have done, once the user comes to the AIRR realm, accepts the terms and condition, only then their LDAP identities are created onto our system, and only after that they are able to access our system dawn. And so this helps us in isolating the users who we are onboarding through this new platform until we build the trust. We do have this second factor authentication that we have enabled on both these realms. This gives us flexibility to support these AI users who and and for the non-MyAccessID users as well, which is a bit painful as of now. And as a part of this project, as Christopher mentioned, we are exploring other identity connectors which can supplement as an alternative to MyAccessID and for the people who can't use MyAccessID. So how MyAccessID work for add-on portal? So as a user, you visit the add-on portal, you select MyAccessID on the login page. MyAccessID looks up your university identity provider via EduGain. So you can choose your university with which you want to do the authentication. MyAccessID will redirect you to your university login page. You provide your credentials, your user ID and password onto the login page of your university. Once it is authenticated, MyAccessID sends the limited user info, which is nothing but the name, email address, and the affiliation to the site portal like Dawn. And once the site portal receives your attributes, which matches with the attributes on which matches with the email on which the invitation was sent, you are able to successfully log into the portal. This is how MyAccessID works. In terms of the common user issues that we have faced till now, so access to the add-on portal depends on, as I said, on the email address. Matching between the project invitation and the mail attribute released by the user's institution by MyAccessID. So what we have seen in some of the cases is there could be a mismatch. So a user can have multiple email address within the university setup. So if the user logs in, let's say with ABCD at the rate university.ac.uk, and they have been invited on another email address, which could be, first name dot last name. And this is something which we all know and familiar with. So in such a scenario, the authentication can fail, and this can result in user not able to, getting access to the platform. So there's a solution for that. As a user or a PI, whoever is sending the invitation, they can use the MyAccessID attribute checker tool, and as a service provider, we can also check, if their attributes are released, and those attributes should be used as a part of the invitation. The another issue that we observed as a part of onboarding the AI users is, sorry, I didn't change my again. So MyAccessID usernames can change when an IDP updates its configuration. And this is something we found out when one of the institute that we had the users onboarded on our platform, they changed their configuration. In terms of the configuration changes, I don't know what was changed, but I guess if the switch is from an old IDP platform to a new IDP platform, it could be a change. If there is a change in the attribute release policy, that could also result in the mismatch. So what happens when something changes at the IDP providers, and it can result in different usernames that MyAccessID sees, even if they are coming with the same email address, and this can complicate thing at the service provider end. So because even if the user is coming with the same email address and try to authenticate on the platform will see them a different user, because MyAccessID assigns them a different username because something has changed at their end. And this resulted in some of the users not able to log in, even though they have authenticated previously. And we did a workaround, but this is something that we have fed back to MyAccessID team in terms of if this is something which they can, consider in their solution, so that this thing doesn't happen. I'm aware about the time, Christopher. Just 1 minute. So
just one more minute. So I'll be good.
Yeah. Lessons from MyAccessID integration. So initial registration of the service took around 20 days, but after that, we had very frequent interactions with the MyAccessID support team. They are very responsive. One thing to note for the MyAccessID integration, if you are looking for, is during the registration, MyAccessID requires explicit fully qualified redirect URL. Something like this won't be valid. Each redirect URL, you can register multiple redirect URL for the same service, so that is possible. Integration was straightforward, but mapping and sync port settings are critical and needs to be taken care when you are integrating MyAccessID within your Keycloak. We have had 2 noticeable incidents where MyAccessID was down. So this resulted in users not able to log into our portal and to the Open on Demand portal, but they still could use the SSH-based access and come to Dawn and submit their jobs. But they were very short-lived and very well communicated by the MyAccessID team. Acknowledgement. So MyAccessID team, I would like to thank MyAccessID team for helping us in the registration of the service, because this was like first time we did something like this, and they were very helpful in all the guidance during the registration. And the Bristol team, especially Christopher, for guiding us in setting up the connection and identifying the various attributes that needs to be matched. and the Keycloak settings that we did. Yeah, thank you.
And I think move on now to James from UCL.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name's James Legg from UCL, and I'm just going to share my slides here. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the sub-project that's going on at UCL. We don't have a MyAccessID solution at the moment, so we're going to build one and record our experiences along the way. So that'll be one of our outputs to try and make it easy for everybody else. Okay, so I told you who I am. My other job is at UCL is to look after the novel architecture machines in something called Project Contender. There's my email address if you want to talk to me about this current project. The Project Contender is relevant. We'll come along to that in a moment. So this is a diagram of what we've decided to build. We have a new private cloud system being worked up at UCL, and we're going to use it for all sorts of things. And to have a go at MyAccessID and learn about the technology, we've come up with this idea of a tenancy in our private cloud that might be used by a research group. So they get some resources inside in the cloud, some storage, some compute, and they have some team members, but team members often come from outside the university. So we've got Dr. Vital Collaborator and Professor Oversight here. Yeah, and wouldn't it be nice if they could use the same resources without you just having to send them downloaded data and so on? They can use the stuff, the compute directly. So, okay, so as suggested, I might set this out as a journey. That's what our project is about. How do we get this in place? So you got to, before you start out on a journey, you need some motivation, and these are my, my personal ones. We've talked about collaboration is our model. And I think, as Deepak has also said, there's plenty of different scenarios why there should be external users for your resources. I looked at some of the existing access solutions. There aren't uses for external users. There are lots of them. They're often bespoke to to a particular architecture or situation. They're also dependent on another department, our high-pressed IS Information Services department. So it'd be nice to have something fairly simple to implement that we can do ourselves. I was using visitor accounts to help people get on, just one or two people get on to our computing resources, but the requirements for that changed, so that was cut off, and it didn't scale anyway. It was you had to get people properly signed up with a special status in the university. And the other motivation is, what do we do in future? Let's have our own solution, one that's easy to understand and one that we can use over and over again. So we wanted to learn about this. The opportunity, how did it arise? Where might we go? Well, the first place I went was to a workshop on Isambard AI. Where I got to log on to a test set of resources at Isambard AI, and it was great. I used MyAccessID. I logged on with my home uni email address. There didn't seem to be need to sign up for some special account at Bristol to use it. So I was authenticated in 5 minutes. That's a separate issue from being authorized. I was obviously authorized because I turned up for their workshop to show me how to use Isambard AI, and because they weren't giving me any very sensitive resources. So again, I was in on 5 minutes on that account. I was so excited. I went to some more and I met the Bristol team, and I also met some people from Jisc who are interested in helping people log on through various means, but they're also interested in MyAccessID, but they also run something called the UK Federation for Access Management. So so Alex Stewart, who's on this call, has been giving me lots of help about how to get started in this area. And very useful people to talk to because they have good lines of contact with the MyAccessID people themselves. The other opportunity is, as you've seen in the model, we're developing a private cloud system, and looks like MyAccessID via Keycloak will go in very nicely into that system. The other thing I liked about it is the private cloud thing is we've kind of managed to separate out the user ID problem. All our other access management things all relied on university-wide user accounts, which are obviously very hard to get or to create. The private cloud, where you have local walled-off systems with their own user IDs, has got around that problem for us. Another part of the opportunity is that we're all universities already registered as an identity provider. That's how I was able to get into Isambard AI, and how I'd be able to get into Dawn if they wanted to give me some resources. So that part's done, and we can be our own test users, right? My ID will work for me to log in to our test tenancy. Okay. Now we've got, if we're going to do the journey metaphor, we've got two on the go. We've got the technical implementation. As it stands, that's all looking very sunny, and that's mostly because we've just hired Sam Rees, who's on this call, who's familiar with Keycloak and stuff, and he's sounding very optimistic that this is not going to be, have too many blocks in the road. I'm working on the regulations and approvals. That's a big part of this community, is the government's aspect. What rules do you have to in place? I guess this is my current impression. I'm sure we'll have a nice rainbow-covered straight road by the time I'm finished, but I'm discovering many layers of regulations and so on, and beginning to wonder about whether they clash and things like that, and whether what the resolutions will be. Okay, so just briefly, our roadmap on each of these are the technical journey. We've obviously decided on a model that's important both technically and for the regulation. We'll come on to that in a minute. We've got a private cloud. It's it's up and running. It's beginning to be used for actual services, so we can allocate servers and storage in a fairly flexible way. We can create tenancies. It's already got some security that walls it off from neighboring tenancies and the outside world, and it has secure access already. Sam's working with the Keycloak. He obviously understands it already, and he'll be understanding how it works in our tenancies, so we'll be writing that up. Next steps are to get it working in a test tenancy, make it available in the private, make it actually work there and available in any tenancy that wants it. And then we'll have a system to map users and resources to permissions in the tenancy, so people can be restricted within the tenancy. And finally, we'll have a look at the security that we've got and see whether it's appropriate for our model use, but that's well into the future. On the regulation journey, we've obviously decided on our model, so we are having people in to help in a scientific research group, so they will need access to real resources. We're working with Jisc. They're helping us fill in the registration form for the MyAccessID with the MyAccessID people. We're their first customer, so we're all learning a lot, and again, that'll get written up. I've discovered loads and loads of policies that might apply. MyAccessID have some. They recommend about 3 different further ones, which I've got to get under my belt. We've got our own Information Services Department regulations. Users may have their own universities regulations, which might conflict. And then, each tenant might impose their own rules on the use of data. And then there's some things coming in from left field, like employment law. When we start to give people access, does that, do you have to make sure you don't make them an employee at the same time? Seems to worry some people. And then we've got things like GDPR and dataset providers rules as well. So you'd be running a trusted research environment if you were doing that. The outputs, we will have some model web pages that guide people through all the regulations that they might encounter, and it'll cover things, how you log in. And apparently you've got to have a site logo if you want to use MyAccessID. My tools for going through the regulations is I've developed a classification of things you might want to regulate, and I'm going to go through all the different sources of regulation and see who really is interested in what, and that might help give us some structure to a guide. And then finally, when I've understood it, I'm going to engage with our internal regulators, so IT security, human resources, and the legal department, and see whether this kind of service provides any new legal or regulatory challenges. So so that's what we're going to be doing. Please join the community where you can tell us about your problems, what you think we're not covering, and to see the final outputs. Okay. That's it, I think. A couple more slides. Yeah, clip art, big fan of clip art apparently. And there we are. I thought this might be a novel feature of a project that we would have a team playlist. So there's my suggestion, and it's all themed about long journeys. So hopefully we'll have a different one at the end of the project about how easy peasy it's all been. Okay, so there we are. That's the end of my presentation.
I'll hand over now to Ayman from STFC Hartree to talk about their MyAccessID journey.
Hi everyone, I'm Ayman Izzeldin, part of the research software engineering team at Hartree Centre. In this talk, I'm going to be talking about the what motivates us at Hartree to adopt the MyAccessID solution, what challenges we have, and what are the requirements so far for adopting it. So just to provide a bit of context to start with around federation, there's the UK and the European digital research infrastructure ecosystem is moving toward federated models. So we've got HPCs, DRIs, NHS, SDAs, for example, increasingly need to interoperate. Additionally, we see projects emerging to support federation, including the recent AIRFED project. And so it's clear for us that federation is emerging as the norm, enabling secure access across boundaries. And here at Hartree, this is quite relevant for us. and on top of that, we need to serve different identities, not just academic ones, but also from the industry and government. So why look into adopting MyAccessID now? I think looking at the success of AIRFED with over 550 MyAccessID authenticated identities consumed to date, and since the start of 2025, almost 60 projects have utilized around like 100,000 GPU hours, I think, on ISO-powered AI, and over 100 early access projects running on Dawn, led by researchers from institutions across the UK. So it's clear to us that MyAccessID is set to become the de facto solution in the UK with AIRFED expansion. And DSET is actually committed to expand federation via this route in the UK. So AIRFED also has a new remit to provide HPC and cloud access to the UK industry, not just academics. So if my slides work. Yeah, so at Hartree, we've recently announced the launch of the Mary Combs cluster with 157 compute nodes powered by NVIDIA H100 GPUs. It positions us to support a much broader audience of users and workloads than before. And by offering Mary Combs as a platform as a service solution, Hartree provides access to cutting-edge hardware at a price point far more cost-effective than equivalent cloud offerings, which is a major attractor for academic, government, research institutes, and industry partners as well, who need access to high-end GPU capability, but may not have the budget or infrastructure to support it internally. With this, we also aim to lower the technical barriers for getting onto the cluster, making it easier for onboarding users. But to achieve that ease of access, we also need a smoother, standardized approach to identity and authentication. And I think that is where MyAccessID comes into play. It allows external collaborators to authenticate using their home institutional credentials without Hartree needing to onboard or manage large number of external identities internally. Another reason I think MyAccessID becomes relevant now is the potential for utilizing spare capacity at Hartree. As with any large HPC system, there will be periods of underuse or fluctuating demand. And federated identity enables us to provide low priority queues, for example, to external researchers or organizations whose identity is already validated through federation. Or we could even, in the future, for instance, participate in wider ecosystems where workloads can be backfilled from trusted federated partners. And this helps improve overall utilization, reducing idle resources and creating opportunities for cost recovery or new business models. So we clearly benefit a lot from adopting MyAccessID for federation. It gives us visibility across UK DRIs and standardizes the authentication process. It also reduces operational overhead as we no longer need to manage all of the identities involved. And it gives us a higher assurance via institutional ITPs. It provides us with the potential to introduce new business models as well. So at Hartree, we have several teams bringing different perspectives that shape how we adopt new technologies. As the RC team, we're naturally oriented toward innovation. We experiment with new platforms and explore modern solutions. And in order to push us towards approaches that improve user experience and technical capability, we want to ensure that we stay at the forefront of what's possible. And in parallel to us is the compliance and governance team that ensures that anything we adopt meets required assurance levels and aligns with STFC and New York AIRR policies. It ensures things like it has properly documented risk assessments and business impact analysis, ensuring responsible adoption. There's also a business impact to consider for wider adoption of a solution. It must integrate with broader organizational strategy and must be sustainable beyond initial deployment. And finally, we have the operations team, which focuses on robustness, maintaining a production service. They manage our production systems and therefore prefer mature, proven, well-supported technologies. And their perspective ensures long-term maintainability. So the success for adopting MyAccessID within Hartree depends on aligning these perspectives together. And so we already have an existing HPC environment that is built on a long-established technology stack where SSH-based access remains the standard approach. The operations team runs a production-grade service, as I mentioned before, and strongly prefers traditional SSH and safe-based access models. So moving Hartree to a new stack for production service is not straightforward, and we must ensure that all Hartree requirements and constraints are met. So beyond the technical integrations, there are critical requirements around cybersecurity, legal and statutory compliance, like GDPR, for example, current policies and processes, and ongoing support and governance, so that any new service must provide assurance of security, be managed by a trusted authority, and include processes for handling vulnerabilities. It must also comply with all legal obligations and align with UKRI, STFC, and also Hartree internal policies. So some requirements are easy to satisfy or are already provided by MyAccessID, while others will require additional effort, I think primarily on our side. And so a practical approach that we've been adopting is progressive adoption, at least for us. So for example, we could start with a federated authentication, initially mapping identities to safe accounts. So this wouldn't be like full federation, as you would still need safe accounts. But a further step would be to host a low priority federated queue where jobs can be preempted without warning. We're also working on enabling SLAM API access through what we call SG API. We could then possibly run pre-canned applications, for example, via the SG API with login accounts coming at a later stage. So we work with a diverse range of users, not just academics, but also government, business, and research institutes. And this creates a gap in MyAccessID, which is primarily designed for academic identities in mind. So I think one option identified in this project is an IDB of last resort, which would allow users without an existing connected identity provider to authenticate through a centrally managed IDB, essentially acting as a fallback mechanism, ensuring that every user, regardless of their affiliation, has a secure and reliable way to access the DRI services. Another option is to use email-based authentication. So this method offers simplicity and convenience for users. It doesn't require integration with an external identity provider. Well, yeah, it's attractive from a usability perspective, but it presents challenges for Hartree. The main concern is security, as email-based authentication does not provide the same level of assurance or trust as an IDB of last resort. And for an organization like Hartree, we handle sensitive data and operate under strict compliance requirements. So this could be a significant barrier to adoption. But one option to mitigate that for the ultra-paranoid, essentially, is to run a registration authority of last resort as a service, which can have like virtual meetings and validate user identities. This is one of the approaches that was implemented in the UKCA, for instance, to authenticate users before providing them with trusted certificates. We can take a similar approach where we keep a list of approved emails, and this might possibly be a bit of an extreme measure. So looking ahead, UK DRIs are moving towards federation, and that pushes us towards this solution, as MyAccessID is becoming the de facto standard for user identity federation. For Hartree, we need to ensure that we can address the gap for government and industry before moving forward with the adoption. I think that positions us for future federation. And this is just the start, right? It puts us at federation level 6 or 5, maybe, where DRIs are still isolated but cooperative. I think this table summarizes well why this is such an important endeavor for us. It's the initial building block for a higher level federation, essentially. I think that's it. Thank you.
I'm Christopher Woods. I'm one of the infrastructure leads at Bristol Centre of Supercomputing, and I'm going to talk about how we have been using MyAccessID to implement compliant authentication authorization on the Isambard Air service. One of the key things, sort of to get started with it and to really understand with why we went with MyAccessID, is we literally had a greenfield site, or as I would term it now, a grey car park site. We managed to build Isambard AI in the entire system in essentially 12 months. We had to build the whole thing, create everything from scratch. And this meant we were free to basically look at what was available at the time and was quickly implementable. And we were looking for ready-made solutions, things we could quickly put together and then use them as part of a federated sort of AI service. So we use MyAccessID for Isambard AI, which is hosted in the big compound here. We also use it for our Tier 2 Isambard 3 service, which is hosted in the pod there. And we're also now using it for Blue Crystal 5, which is the University of Bristol's Tier 3 service. So we're really it's a very sort of, it's a great service which enables us basically to sort of run across all sort of levels of HPC. Now, to show you how we use it, this is a typical user login journey. So starting from their terminal, they want to SSH in. We have a small tool called Clifton, which is how they start authentication. Here, they then open up MyAccessID to be able to log in. They choose their university. That brings them to their university login page. You choose your university account, and I've already logged in. And then, because I'm already authenticated, I then connect to Clifton. Clifton has now authorized me, and then I'm able to then SSH in to Isambard AI. The goal is to make this process as easy and as quick as possible, and I didn't edit this down. This is how quick the process can be to actually log on to your system using MyAccessID and the various Keycloak tools that we kind of combine together to go onto the service. Now, what we're doing with this is basically using MyAccessID and Keycloak to authenticate identities. So this means essentially, give me an identity that is authentic, that we can trust. So the flow is from our service, which is trying to authenticate an identity. For example, our login user management portal, the portal is Isambard AC UK. When you click sign in, you're kind of talking to Keycloak. And what Waldo is doing is it's saying, give me an authenticated identity. Then the user is presented with a page where they choose how they want to log in, and it could be with MyAccessID or an IDP of last resort. If they click on MyAccessID, then our Keycloak then goes to MyAccessID and says, give me an authenticated identity. On MyAccessID, the user would then type in their university, and then MyAccessID, then using EduGain, goes to the university's identity provider and says, give me an authenticated identity. So it's this chain of this request, give me an authenticated identity, till eventually we get to an identity provider who can then allow the user to log in. When the user logs in correctly and does everything they need to do to connect to their account, the identity then provider then sends back some attributes. In this case, an email address and the first name and last name, and obviously the institution with the email. This is passed back to MyAccessID. MyAccessID passes it back to our Keycloak. Our Keycloak uses that email address as the subject ID. This is how we identify people, and we know it has been authenticated by an identity provider, and it then gets passed back to our portal and says, Christopher Woods has logged in. It's really important to understand that we're using MyAccessID for authentication, not for authorization. MyAccessID authenticates an identity. Essentially, it goes back to the identity provider for that identity and says, can you tell us that the person who is saying they're them is actually able to log in and control that account? And I think it's important to sort of be clear. The identity provider can only tell you that this person is able to control the account. It doesn't mean they are who they say they are, because obviously the account could have been compromised. Somebody could have hacked into it, blah, blah, blah. You have to trust the identity provider has robust security processes in place, and also understand you are testing, does an individual control the identity which you're trying to authenticate? Now, MyAccessID is supported internationally. And just because somebody can authenticate with MyAccessID, you can authenticate across Asia, across America, across Europe, it does not mean they're authorized, they're allowed to connect to your service. So a successful MyAccessID authentication does not say anything about whether the user is authorized, allowed to log in. Authorization is saying, are you allowed to log in? Authentication, this person could the person presenting themselves can control the account. Authorization, they're allowed to log in. What we then do is we basically use our Keycloak and also our project and user management software, which is Waldor, which comes from EuroHPC and from OpenNode, a company in Europe. And we use this to do project-based authorization. So our Keycloak will ask Waldor as part of the login flow, is this person allowed to log in? And Waldor will say yes if they're a member of or have been invited to a project, and it will say no if not. And if Waldor says no, they're not authorized to log in, then Keycloak will just stop the login and say, sorry, go away. Keycloak also receives from Waldor attributes from our project management system to say which services someone is authorized to log into and also which projects they're connected to. And those attributes are then passed downstream to our services, to our clusters, our SSH logins, our Jupyter hubs, our help desk, etc., to then enable people to be authorized to use those services. So, for example, if I go back to that login flow, that SSH flow that I showed earlier, when I did Clifton Auth, what's really happening is Clifton is talking to Conch, which is our secure shell signing system, hence it's called Conch. And all it's saying is sign my SSH key. Without any identity information at all, just sign this key. Conch needs to then get the authorization attributes from Keycloak. So it passes the user to our Keycloak. The user on Keycloak then chooses the MyAccessID login route. And then Keycloak says, okay, you need to authenticate, pass to MyAccessID. MyAccessID says, okay, you've asked Bristol, you need to authenticate with Bristol. And when we authenticate with Bristol, it then comes back, Christopher Woods at Bristol to our Keycloak. Our Keycloak then talks to our project management software at Waldor and says, can you give us the authorization attributes for Christopher Woods at Bristol AC UK? Waldor will then respond with, yeah, this person can log in. This person uses their short name is C Woods. They can access the Isambard AI cluster at Brick on the Bricks project, the demo cluster on Isambard 3, etc. And with that authorization information, it passes it back, or will pass it back to Conch, but obviously the data sharing part, where the user then has to say, do you really want to share this information with Conch? Do you grant access to this? And if you click yes, that passes that back, and Conch can then say, yep, Chris Woods is authorized to use these projects and connect to these services. Conch is then able to then assign the SSH certificate and then returns that to the user. You see it's now signed for those two projects, signed only for 12 hours to force you to do this every day. And then you can then SSH in using that certificate to connect to the service. Now, compliance is what makes all of this all fun and tricky. There are very strict rules, and particularly now post-COVID, and in the geopolitical world we now live in, there are very strict rules who can use AI services and from which countries you can use AI services and from which organizations can use those AI services. And the trusted research agenda, which comes from government and through UKRI and DCIT, is a very stringent thing now. And there's also export control rules, which are also quite strict. This means we have to be very careful when we let people log onto the service, and we need to be very clear of who is ultimately legally responsible for how someone uses a service, who gave access to the service, etc., etc. Is it the project lead? Is it the employer? Is it the group who allocated the project, DCIT, UKRI? Now, I'm not going to go into that in detail here because it was a very fun process going through it, but ultimately we developed a compliance workflow in partnership with the allocators of Isambard AI and Isambard 3, which is DCIT and UKRI, and ultimately it's a combination of manual and automatic checking that goes through our project management service and is also integrated in Keycloak to basically make sure that when you go through the system, you're only able to log in and gain access if you are compliant. Now, part of this is making sure that people accept access terms and data privacy terms and all of those wonderful things that I'm sure we all read in detail. Again, within Keycloak, after you've been through that MyAccessID authentication, Keycloak then presents to you the access terms, and it will only do this if it's seen that you haven't accepted the latest version of those terms. If you haven't accepted the latest version, you're presented with them, you have to read them and you have to click accept, and then it creates the audit logs that actually show when you've accepted everything, which we can then use to demonstrate compliance later on. Until you accept, you can't get any further in the system, you can't log on and do anything else. Once you do accept, everything is fine and you can connect, and again you won't be presented with them again, which is why the first login I showed at the beginning was so super quick. Now those login checks actually happen here on this whole sort of flow. So you ask for the certificate, ask Keycloak to be authorized, and then Keycloak, once you've then connected with the MyAccessID, then checks your compliance status. And if that's okay, it passes it back before then doing that authorization dance with Wardor, then passing back to Conch to sign the certificate and return to the user. The key components of this are MyAccessID for authentication, Wardor for authorization, and then Keycloak sitting here in the middle, which is really a wonderful service for identity proxying, for coordinating sort of all of the bits of software that sit around it, for running OpenID Connect flows, OIDC flows, and SAML flows, and for building compliant workflows. And then Conch at the top for signing our certificates. In conclusion, a combination of MyAccessID, Keycloak, Wardor, and Conch has given us a really highly automated, self-service, federated project and user management system for authentication and compliant authorization. We've had this now in production use for about 18 months. Currently, we have over 400 active projects on the system, and we've processed over 1,500 users who have used it with little problem. And I get lots of nice comments from people using it saying it's actually very easy to log on to Isambard AI, and that makes me feel very happy because we threw this together extremely quickly. So with that, I will finish this talk. Hi, Alex. Hand over to Alex for the final talk of the session, and then we'll go into a discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Christopher, and Deepak as well for the invite to this workshop as well. I introduce myself. I work for Jisc. I'm part of the UK Federation team, and we are within Trust and Identity. We work across a number of different services, but the one for this workshop, I think, is the UK Federation, and we're part of EduGain as well. So actually, as the workshop has gone on, I have been shuffling my slides around a little bit. So let's see how I get on here. So the title was Governance and Roadmap. We've talked and this is about MyAccessID and about trust and identity services within Géant. We've not really, well, people have talked a little about Géant in the rest of the workshop. I will talk a little bit more about that. And in terms of governance, I think the route in here is through EduGain itself. And we've heard a number of the speakers talking about EduGain there. So I have a slide here, which are the the sizes of the component federations within EduGain. EduGain is an interfederation service. It has, I think there's 83 component federations within EduGain. It acts as a service to share metadata between them. And in this slide, I've plotted the number of SPs along the bottom. Each service provider, I mean, MyAccessID is one of those. There are plenty more. The UK Federation has traditionally been a federation of publishers. We have more SPs than we have identity providers, but you'll see in terms of the makeup of EduGain, the UK Federation provides the most number of IDPs. So we have quite a lot of. Also, the UK Federation has a help desk. I mentioned in the chat earlier on. We have a lot of experience of diagnosing these kind of, kind of connection issues when people upgrade their IDP. There are quite a lot of things that can go wrong when you upgrade an IDP. Kind of salts that are used in creating targeted IDs. The encoding method as well can change in that. So our help desk, our technical help desk, has quite a lot of experience with that, and might be useful for IDPs with connecting to MyAccessID. Have a think. That's probably all I want to say about that. Oh, no, I suppose the other thing as well is to say that each of the federations has their own rules of membership and governance and so on. Joining EduGain doesn't supplant those federation rules. The EduGain declaration, it neither supplants the rules and the governance of the individual federations, and it also doesn't make any guarantee about access to services or anything like that. It is mostly a metadata exchange for the entities within it, and there's about 10,000 so far, and it's growing all the time. So that is enough for that slide, I think. And the next part is about the governance. We've heard a bit that MyAccessID is a GÉANT service. This slide tries to talk a little bit about, or tries to show a little bit about the way that the GÉANT and the trust and identity services are, how they run them. GÉANT is a membership organisation. The members are the national research and education networks, like Jisc or SURF in the Netherlands, or so. And the assembly and board up in the top left of that diagram is the overall governing body for GÉANT. The services themselves are delivered through the GÉANT project, and GN52 is the current iteration of that project. On the next slide, I'll show some kind of timescales of that. Within that project, there are 9 work packages, and trust and identity is work package 5, and there are about 100, or over 100 people, I think, working in that work package. I spend some of my time. I'm part of GN52 project, and I spend my time working on EduGain in the operations team. I've worked on their help desk, now in operations. And I think for the purposes of this talk, just the 3 main services that the trust and identity services in the GÉANT project are EduRoam, EduGain, MyAccessID. There's also a trust and identity incubator with software development. There's in academia as well, which is a kind of more commercial service. But for these 3, I just wanted to compare the governance of each of these 3 services. I know EduGain most, and we've currently got 83 participating federations, 10,000 identity providers and service providers in there, and estimates are 27 million connected accounts or potential connected accounts. And we've spent, sorry, up until the end of last year, there was about an 18-month period of trying to review the governance of Edugain. Prior to that, there was an Edugain assembly. There's always been an Edugain assembly, and it's kind of one member, one vote. It was very hard to make decisions and move things on. We've heard in the chat already that there's no way of guaranteeing the attributes you'll get from identity providers in Edugain and so on. So it was seen as very slow to make changes to the governance, make changes to the profiles. So that kind of 18-month period has come up to has made a steering committee, and that steering committee are the ones that are defining the policy. Steering committee has 6 elected people from the community, 4 of them from Education. Pardon me, 4 from Edugain member federations, 2 can be from the community at large, and there are 3 who are on the steering committee because of their position as the Edugain service owner, and 2 people from Géant Secretariat as well. So that's taken quite a while to put in place, and we've now had the steering committee working and starting to change some of the policies. And as I said in the chat just before, we should have, we have an Edugain technical profiles working group. We're going to be looking at the technical profiles, which will cover attribute release, certify, which is a kind of security framework. Those I think are the main 2 just off the top of my head. But we've only just started this, so we'll see where we go with that. That's Edugain. I could talk more, I won't. Eduroam, I don't know so much about, but in the sense that it's an older service than Edugain. It started in 2003. Slightly larger in terms of number of constituents. Its technical architecture is different as well. That everything goes through, or the roaming, the authentications go through a kind of hierarchical infrastructure. But the governance of that seems quite mature in the sense that there's 5 regions. Each of those regions has 3 members in that. They're the kind of well-known names. You can see that they're experts, and then there's non-voting experts in that as well. So we compare that with MyAccessID, which is actually quite a new service, but is moving on absolutely at pace. 1,200 connected identity providers for that, and 650,000 user accounts apparently with there. But it doesn't seem to have a formal governance structure in there. I mean, there's things in the Géant project and the Géant assembly at the kind of higher levels, but they don't have, to the best of my knowledge, a governance function within it. I mean, for both Eduroam and Edugain, you go to their website, there's a part of that says governance. MyAccessID doesn't seem to have that. It does, however, engage with stakeholders, and obviously any of the HPC resources. You've worked with them, and you've shared your use cases and your requirements and so on. So it's a somewhat different governance structure, I think, than the other services that have been there for longer. Which I think brings me to another slide about timescales. The Géant project GM52 is 2.5 years, and we're a year into that. That's the project that funds MyAccessID and funds the staff working on that. So there's another 1.5 years of that to go. Géant project GN53 is a year and a half after that. I mean, I've got every expectation that MyAccessID will continue into GN53. You know, there's enough connected services there. But that as I should also mention as well the funding for trust and identity in GN52. Part of that is European Commission funding, and part of that is a cost-sharing agreement with the National Research and Education Networks. So in that sense, Jisc is part of the governance of that, but it's still not explicit in the terms of MyAccessID or Work Package 5. So those are the kind of Géant projects. More of the kind of tactical ones. I mean, most people here seem to be, you know, in the chat, people talking about HPC SIG and CI UK and so on. These aren't things that we as the UK Federation really know. You know, we're certainly playing catch up. The conferences, the meetings that we know about and we go to are that kind of middle block in this slide. There's Internet 2, which is the United States Research and Education Network. That's happening next week. Time On conference is a European identity meeting that's happening in February, and TNC is the European Networking Conference in June. So we're kind of working through those, trying to engage with MyAccessID when we can. And the last one there, the last two, sorry, this really the post-quantum, which is exercising me a little bit. We just have to make sure that SAML, OpenID Connect, you know, the protocols that people are using at the moment, we can safely roll out some of the kind of quantum resistant algorithms within that. But that also kind of fits within these timescales of the GN5 project as well. That is a bit of a rattle through governance. No kind of answers there, but more just describing that. In the kind of latter part of the talk, I just dropped this in as during the other presentations as well. So this is the ARC blueprint architecture. This came out of a probably a 10-year piece of work of gathering requirements and so on, coming up with a blueprint architecture for the components that one might want for an access and authentication infrastructure. And it's quite, I think it's quite complementary to one of the latter slides of that Christopher showed as well, with, you know, MyAccessID for authentication and Walder for attribute for authorization and so on. So I'll just put that in there. The slides will get shared, so it's more just to have that as a reference. The thing I think we didn't talk about, or no one else talked about explicitly in the rest of the workshop, was the discovery service. James from UCL talked a little bit about a logo, or, you know, a logo is a requirement as that. The discovery services are the things that allows the user to choose which IDP to authenticate at, and I mean, Christopher demonstrated those. It's good to have a logo in there. We found that on the UK Federation as well. It does help with some kind of recognition of the service. So that's a part of this as well. Oh, and I should also say some of the things that are, so this was developed over about 10 years. Some of the work that Jisc is doing is we're looking at what is missing from this architecture. And one thing is this kind of identity matcher. So people often have roles, have more than one role. They might be staff at one university, they might be a student somewhere else, or they might have 2 or more affiliations or part-time roles or so on. And we want to explore that a little bit. We also looking at the kind of accounting and the accountability within there. So hopefully we'll be able to expand on this. This is a bit of a busy slide. I said that the second part was going to be roadmap as well. Most of this, right, so the green lines across the top is the development, is the kind of technical develop. Oh, I should also say this is for the whole of the GN52 project, so 2.5 years. We are about here towards the end of 2025. This also includes 26 and the first half of 27. The development of the kind of technical parts of it. We've seen the SSH from Christopher's talk, which is up here. OpenID Federation, there was something in the chat about that, and so on. It's the service delivery that I think is most relevant for the work that I'm doing with that I've been asked for from UCL, and particularly this NREN pilot, which is slated to start Q2 next year. But we realise that the work the UCL are doing and the NFCS project will have to happen before that as well. So I'm trying to work with Géant to be able to do some kind of pathfinding with the UCL folks before they start working with the NRENs fully. There's about 3 different mechanisms that they've proposed for how NRENs can put services behind MyAccessID. One of which is the thing that James talked about, having Jisc as an agent and doing the registrations themselves. There's another one which is working with IDP operators, and the third one is just through a filling in details on the web portal. So it'd be interesting hearing, from both Isambard and Dawn, how they went through that. That kind of 20-day, I think there was a 20-day initial registration period, which I find fascinating because it's taken us as UK Federation much longer to do that. On the other hand, we don't have a service that we want to put there. We're just one of those infrastructure layers. So anyway, that's the kind of the roadmap from MyAccessID. My next slide. Oh, on this as well, I want to say there's EOSC, which are these 3 kind of blocks here, which is the European Open Science Cloud, and there's the Euro HPC, which I'm sure you're familiar with. These are big pieces of work. There's lots of integration with that. And just to do some kind of logos here, Euro HPC, there's lots of installations within that. EOSC as well, their federation is in the build-up phase. The size of that looks has the potential to be really quite large. So, for example, there's a whole series of logos here. The ones that I recognise most are the SURF logo, which is essentially the equivalent of Jisc, but in the Netherlands, and CSC, which similarly, but in Finland as well. So it's a crowded landscape, and I don't want to overpromise things from Jisc and the UK Federation team here in what help we can do getting into MyAccessID, because there's lots of people in the queue. And that is pretty much what I wanted to say. So thank you very much for your time. Sorry for going a smidgen over.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for presenting and also coming and talking to us about how everything fits together.